In our last video, we talked about social anxiety. What happens in the body when a social situation feels threatening? How the nervous system turns ordinary moments into emergencies. But for some of you, that wasn't quite it. Not fear of the conversation. Something stranger. Something that happens before the conversation even exists. You're in the shower, rehearsing. You're driving to work, not really driving. You're in a boardroom, calmly delivering a rebuttal to something your manager hasn't said yet. You're lying awake at 1 a.m., cycling through versions of a text you haven't sent. And often, the conversation never happens. Or it does happen, and goes as planned. You're not exactly afraid of people. You're exhausted by the preparation for them. And the worst part, the more you care about getting it right, the more you rehearse. Your empathy, your actual ability to read people, is what makes it worse. Psychologists call this pre-conversation rumination. I think it deserves a better name. Call it the phantom dialogue effect. The phantom dialogue is a conversation that lives entirely in your head. You write both sides. You play every role. You anticipate objections, soften blows, and recast your opening line for the fourth time. Society has a word for you naturally. Overthinker. 2 in your head. You need to relax. The shame in that label is real because you know exactly what this costs. You know what it steals from your sleep and from the actual moment you're supposed to be in. Today we're going to take it apart. Why your brain does this, what it's actually trying to protect you from, and 3 things that help more than telling yourself to stop. When someone tells you to stop overthinking, they're saying, turn off the alarm. But alarms don't ring without a reason. For most of human history, social mistakes were genuinely costly. Being misunderstood by your group didn't just mean an awkward silence. It could mean exile, loss of protection, your whole world. Psychologists call this the social threat detection system. For most of us, at some point, it was activated hard. Maybe a parent was unpredictable and you learned to read the room obsessively. Maybe you said the wrong thing once, at a dinner table, in a classroom, in a relationship, and the cost was devastating. Maybe the people around you were volatile, and anticipation became a way to stay safe. So your brain built a protocol. Before you walk into uncertainty, simulate it first. That made sense. The problem is that brains don't automatically update their threat models. What was once a useful skill becomes a loop. The simulation keeps running even when the danger is gone. Even in conversation with someone who loves you. Even when the stakes are, honestly, low. Here's what's actually going on. The phantom dialogue effect is much more common in 2 kinds of people. High empathy people, those who naturally model other people's emotional states and instinctively feel what it's like to be on the receiving end of their own words. That's not anxiety. It's advanced perspective taking, running automatically, whether you asked it to or not. And people with high verbal intelligence, people who care about precision and understand that the same sentence can land 10 different ways depending on tone. They rehearse because they genuinely understand how much words can do. That's not a flaw. It's accurate. So stop framing this as a mental health failure. The phantom dialogue effect doesn't mean you're broken. It means your brain built a social modeling system, and that system has no off switch. The person who never rehearses isn't more confident than you. They're just less attuned to the social data your brain is constantly picking up. Your sensitivity is real. What we need to change is what you do with it when it won't let you sleep. The engine behind all of this is mental simulation. Some people use reactive processing. They respond to what's in front of them. You use predictive processing. You run the scene before it happens. Chess players do this. Surgeons do this before complex operations. A grandmaster, before touching a piece, has already traced multiple futures. They feel which ones end badly and reject them. That's exactly what you're doing at 11 p.m., rehearsing a conversation with your landlord. The difference is that the grandmaster learned to contain the simulation. They run it in a bounded space, then stop. They don't replay the same move for 6 hours. A jazz musician improvising doesn't try to play every note they could. They play from a library of practiced patterns and trust it. They don't restart the song because the first chord could theoretically have gone differently. The exhaustion isn't from simulating. It's from the loop, the inability to say, "This is enough, we're ready, close the file." Trying to stop the rehearsal doesn't work. When you tell yourself not to think about this, your brain treats that as a threat signal. The file stays open. The simulation keeps running in the background, whether you're paying attention to it or not. Suppression doesn't close loops. Completion does. Here's what actually helps. Give your brain a specific time to rehearse, and a clear signal that the rehearsal is done. When you notice a conversation looping, don't push it away. Say, "I'm going to think about this properly at 7 tonight." Then, at 7, sit down and actually do it. Write out the main points you want to make. Anticipate 1 or 2 likely responses, not 17. Spend 15 or 20 minutes. Then write at the bottom, "Prepared. This is enough." You're not going for the perfect conversation. You're going for 80% ready. The other 20% is the actual human being in front of you, who will always say something you didn't anticipate. That's not a failure of preparation. It's just how people work. Trying to rehearse for every possible response is exactly where the loop lives. This tells your threat detection system, "I heard you, I prepared, we're done." Most of the time, it listens. Instead of trying to script the whole conversation, build what therapists call an anchor script, a short, flexible opening you actually know by heart. Churchill was famous for speeches that seemed spontaneous. Most people didn't know he spent hours on the first 2 sentences. Just the first 2. Because the beginning of a difficult conversation sets the emotional register for everything that follows. A grounded opening gives the rest of it room to breathe. An anchor script is 3 sentences, maybe less. It names the topic, sets your tone, and opens a door. That's it. Everything after that, the messy, unscripted part, you can trust yourself to handle. You've handled hard conversations before. You just don't tend to file that as evidence. The third point addresses something the first 2 don't fully cover. The phantom dialogue effect doesn't only happen before difficult conversations. It happens after them too. You replay the exchange. You find the line you should have said. You feel the heat of the moment when you stumble. Your brain is doing this to learn, not to torture you. But without somewhere to put those experiences, they pile up in working memory like boxes stacked in a hallway until there's no room to walk through. Every unprocessed conversation makes the next rehearsal more complicated. Think of your mind as a lab bench where data keeps arriving. If you don't move completed experiments off the bench, there's no space for the next one. Marcus Aurelius kept a journal. Every night, he recorded what happened, what he said, and what he wished he'd said differently, not to punish himself, to process it and let it go. That's where the meditations came from. Whatever you think of Stoic philosophy, the practice itself is worth stealing. After a conversation that's looping in your head, write 3 things. What actually happened, just the facts in 1 paragraph. What you're telling yourself it means. This is usually where the distortion lives. What you'd tell a friend in the same situation. This is where your actual judgment is. The part of you not stuck in the threat loop. Then close the entry. You're not solving anything. You're filing it. The useful part comes months later, when you look back. You'll see that the conversation you spent 3 days dreading went well. That the person you were afraid of misreading you understood you completely. That your brain was running an old program. That's when the loop starts to lose its grip, not because you argued yourself out of it, but because you've built actual evidence that your brain's predictions are often wrong. You're not broken. You're not someone who just needs to relax. You're someone whose brain built a social simulation system, probably in childhood, likely in response to something real, to protect you from the cost of being misunderstood. That system isn't your enemy. It's an overworked guardian running on outdated instructions. The deliberate rehearsal window gives it a scheduled time to do its job and then stop. The anchor script tells it that the hardest part is already handled. The conversation vault gives it somewhere to file what's done instead of keeping everything on the bench. When you actually use these, something shifts. Not because you stop caring about conversations, but because your nervous system starts building a new reference point. The loop doesn't vanish, but it gets shorter, quieter, and it stops eating your 1 a.m. I put together a free guide called the Phantom Dialogue Toolkit, a printable rehearsal window template, an anchor script guide for 3 common difficult conversations, and a conversation vault journal prompt you can use tonight. The link is in the description. Try it this week, even once. Some of you listened to all of this and recognized a different problem. Not that you rehearse too much, but that you avoid the conversation entirely. You don't prepare for it, you cancel it. You postpone it indefinitely and convince yourself it doesn't really need to happen. That's a different part of the same territory. Our video on avoidance patterns and the freeze response in social situations is right here. Thanks for watching. I hope something in here gave you a name for something you've been carrying quietly for a while. That matters, honestly, even if you don't try any of the strategies. Try whichever of the 3 feels most useful right now. See you in the next one.